Marcus Chen sat in his dark office at 3 in the morning, staring at his computer screen with bloodshot eyes that burned from exhaustion. The sounds echoed through the penthouse again, Emma's desperate cries for mama, mixing with Ethan's angry screams that pierced the silence like broken glass. 8 months had passed since the accident. 8 months since Sarah's car skidded on that rainy Seattle street and changed everything forever. But his 4-year-old twin still woke up every single night as if it had happened yesterday. Marcus dragged himself from his chair, his body moving like a man twice his age, and walked down the marble hallway toward the children's room where chaos waited for him once more. He found Emma curled in a tight ball under her princess blanket, tears streaming down her small face, while Ethan stood in his crib throwing every stuffed animal he could reach across the room with the fury only a heartbroken child could possess. "Where's Mama hiding?" Emma whispered through her sobs, the same question she asked every night. And Marcus felt his heart break all over again because he still didn't know how to answer her. He gathered both children into his arms, feeling their tiny bodies shake, with grief that seemed too heavy for such small souls to carry, and began the familiar routine of walking the halls, singing off-key lullabies, and making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The previous nanny, Mrs. Henderson, had quit just yesterday after Ethan bit her arm so hard it left marks, and Emma had spent 3 hours screaming that she hated everyone who wasn't her mother, throwing toys and refusing to eat or speak to anyone. Marcus understood their anger because he felt it too, burning in his chest like acid every morning when he woke up, hoping the nightmare was over, only to remember that Sarah's side of the bed would stay empty forever. His tech company was falling apart because he couldn't focus on board meetings or product launches when his children were suffering, and his assistant Jennifer had started taking over most of his responsibilities without being asked. The sleep specialists had given up after their medications made Emma sick and turned Ethan into a zombie who stared at walls for hours, and the child psychologists spoke in gentle voices about processing grief and healing time while his children continued to fall apart each night. Marcus had tried everything he could think of: nightlights shaped like stars, white noise machines, sleeping in their room on a makeshift bed, even hiring a live-in housekeeper who promised she understood children. But nothing worked because nothing could bring back the woman who used to sing them to sleep with her beautiful voice. By 4 in the morning, exhaustion finally claimed the twins, and Marcus tucked them back into their beds with shaking hands, knowing he would get maybe 3 hours of sleep before his alarm went off and the day started all over again. He stumbled to his own bedroom and collapsed on top of the covers, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt, and stared at Sarah's photograph on the nightstand where her smile seemed to mock his failures as a father. Jennifer had left him a message about a new nanny candidate, someone different from the others, a woman named Grace Washington, who specialized in children with unique challenges and had references from families who swore she worked miracles. Marcus felt too tired to hope anymore, but desperation made him call the number anyway. And when Grace's warm voice answered the phone at 7 in the morning, something in her tone made him sit up straighter in his chair. She arrived that afternoon carrying a small canvas bag and wearing a simple blue dress that somehow made her dark skin glow with an inner light that seemed to fill the cold penthouse with warmth. Grace was younger than he expected, maybe with kind eyes that looked directly at him when she spoke, and didn't flinch when the twins immediately ran to hide behind his legs like frightened animals. "They've been through something terrible," she said softly, kneeling down to their level without trying to force contact. "And they're scared that if they go to sleep, someone else they love might disappear." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach, because no one else had understood the real reason behind the sleepless nights. And when Emma peeked out from behind his knee to stare at this stranger who somehow knew their secret fear, he felt the first spark of hope he'd experienced in months. Grace spent the day moving quietly through the penthouse, observing the children without pressuring them, helping with simple tasks like making lunch and organizing toys, and by evening the twins were curious enough to sit near her during dinner, instead of hiding in their rooms. When bedtime approached, Marcus braced himself for the usual battle, but Grace surprised him by asking if she could try something different, something her grandmother had taught her long ago about helping scared children find peace. She led Emma and Ethan to their beds and began arranging their stuffed animals in a protective circle, explaining in her gentle voice that these were their guardians who would watch over them while they slept and make sure no bad dreams could get through. Then Grace pulled out a small wooden box from her bag and showed them tiny dolls no bigger than her thumb, explaining that these were worry dolls who would take their scared feelings away if they whispered their fears before closing their eyes. But it was what happened next that made Marcus lean against the door frame with tears streaming down his face, because Grace began to sing a lullaby unlike anything he had ever heard, her voice rising and falling in a language he didn't recognize, but that seemed to wrap around his children like invisible arms made of love itself. The melody was haunting and beautiful, filled with pain and hope in equal measure. And as the last notes faded into silence, Marcus realized something miraculous had happened. His house was completely quiet for the first time in 8 months. Emma's breathing had become deep and even, her small hand clutching one of the worried dolls, while Ethan lay still in his crib with his thumb in his mouth and peace written across his sleeping face. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, afraid to move or breathe too loudly, afraid that any sound might shatter this impossible moment of silence that felt like the first step toward healing. And when Grace appeared beside him with tears in her own eyes, he whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought this mysterious woman into their broken lives. Marcus woke up to something. He hadn't heard in 8 months the sound of children laughing in his kitchen, and when he checked his phone, he couldn't believe his eyes because it was already 9 in the morning, which meant he had actually slept through the entire night without interruption. He rushed downstairs, expecting to find chaos or tears, but instead discovered Emma and Ethan standing on small stools beside Grace, their tiny hands covered in flour as they helped flip pancakes on the stove, while Grace sang a cheerful song that made them giggle with pure joy. "Daddy, look what we made," Emma called out, holding up a slightly burnt pancake shaped like a lopsided heart, and Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion because she hadn't called him Daddy with such happiness since before the accident. Grace smiled at him over the children's heads, her eyes sparkling with warmth, and explained that she had turned breakfast into a game where each pancake represented a different feeling, and the children could choose which emotions they wanted to eat first to start their day. Over the following days, Marcus watched in amazement as Grace transformed every ordinary moment into something magical. Bath time became an underwater adventure, where rubber ducks were brave explorers. Getting dressed became a superhero transformation, where clothes gave them special powers. And even cleaning up toys turned into a treasure hunt, where each item had to find its perfect home. The twins began sleeping through the night consistently, but more importantly, they started laughing again, their eyes losing that haunted look that had broken Marcus's heart for so many months. Grace never pushed too hard or tried to replace their mother's memory. Instead, she helped them understand that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone they had lost, and she encouraged them to share stories about Sarah during quiet moments before bed. Marcus found himself looking forward to coming home from work, something he hadn't felt since the accident, because Grace had breathed life back into their house with her gentle presence and infectious laughter. She left small, encouraging notes. In his briefcase, simple messages like "You're doing great," or "The twins are lucky to have you," and gradually convinced him to participate in bedtime stories, again by suggesting he voice the dragon characters while she handled the princesses. But as the weeks passed, Marcus began noticing strange things about Grace that made him curious and slightly worried about what she might be hiding from them. Sometimes he caught her staring at the family photographs on the mantel with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not sadness exactly, but something deeper and more complicated that made her hands tremble slightly before she turned away. When he asked about her previous experience or her family, Grace would deflect the questions with a gentle smile and change the subject to something about the children, as if her own past was too painful or too private to share with anyone. She seemed to know advanced techniques for dealing with childhood trauma that went far beyond typical nanny training, and Marcus wondered where she had learned to read children's emotions with such precision and respond with exactly the right words or actions. Late one evening, while checking on the twins in their room, Marcus heard Grace talking quietly on her phone in the kitchen, and her tone was urgent and worried in a way he had never heard before. "I know, they look like them," she whispered to whoever was on the other end, "but I can handle this. I promise I can keep helping these children without losing myself again." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized she was talking about Emma and Ethan, and when she continued with, "I won't let what happened before happen again," he backed away from the kitchen doorway with his mind racing with questions and concerns. The next morning, Grace seemed perfectly normal again, helping the twins build a fort out of couch cushions and teaching them how to make friendship bracelets from colorful string. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that she was carrying some heavy secret that connected her to his children in ways he didn't understand. He started paying closer attention to her behavior, noticing how she sometimes seemed to hold her breath when the twins laughed in certain ways, or how her eyes would fill with tears during their evening prayers, even though she tried to hide it by looking away. Grace began sharing careful stories about her own childhood, speaking of a grandmother who had raised her with traditional healing songs and wisdom about helping hurt children find peace. But she never mentioned parents or siblings or any recent relationships, as if her life had started with her grandmother and then jumped directly to working as a nanny. Marcus found himself staying up later each night, enjoying their conversations after the twins were asleep, talking about everything from child psychology to favorite books to dreams for the future, and he realized he was beginning to care about Grace as more than just someone who worked for him, but just as he was starting to trust completely in the peace and happiness Grace had brought to their lives. Everything changed with one disturbing phone call that made him question everything he thought he knew about the woman who had saved his family. The voice on the other end was professional, but cold, asking if he was satisfied with Grace Washington's work, and suggesting they had important information about her background that might concern him as a father. Before Marcus could ask who was calling or what kind of information they meant, the line went dead, leaving him staring at his phone with his heart pounding and his mind filled with terrible possibilities about what Grace might be hiding from them. That night, he found himself unable to sleep despite the twins' peaceful slumber, and he crept to their bedroom door to check the monitor, where he saw Grace sitting in the rocking chair beside their beds, holding a small photograph close to her chest while tears streamed silently down her face in the pale glow of the nightlight. And although the image was too blurry for him to make out any details, her raw pain was unmistakable and terrifying. Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything the next day, his mind spinning with questions about the mysterious phone call and Grace's tears over that hidden photograph. So he made a decision that would change everything. He contacted a private investigator named David Ross, who specialized in background checks for wealthy families who needed to protect their children. 3 days later, David called with information that made Marcus feel like the ground was cracking beneath his feet, his voice serious and careful as he explained what his research had uncovered about Grace Washington's real past. "Mr. Chen, you need to sit down for this," David said, and then he revealed the shocking truth that Grace had been married to a man named Robert Washington, and together they had twin children, a boy named Michael and a girl named Elena, both for years old, the exact same age as Emma and Ethan. Marcus gripped his phone tighter as David continued, explaining that 2 years ago, Grace had been working a double shift as a pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital when an electrical fire started in her home, and by the time the fire department arrived, her house was completely destroyed with her husband and both children trapped inside, unable to escape from their upstairs bedroom. The investigator's voice became gentler as he described how Grace had blamed herself completely for not being home to save her family, how the guilt had destroyed her marriage to Robert, who had survived but couldn't forgive her absence that night, and how she had lost her nursing license after suffering a complete emotional breakdown that required months of therapy and medication. Marcus felt sick to his stomach as he realized that Grace had chosen to work for his family because Emma and Ethan looked exactly like the children she had lost, down to their ages, their mixed heritage, and even their personalities. Emma's gentle sweetness reminded Grace of her daughter, Elena, while Ethan's stubborn determination was identical to her son Michael's fierce spirit. When David finished his report, Marcus sat in stunned silence for several minutes, understanding now why Grace had stared at their family photos with such pain in her eyes, why she knew exactly how to comfort grieving children, and why she sometimes seemed to hold her breath when the twins laughed as if she was seeing ghosts come back to life. That evening, after putting Emma and Ethan to bed with their usual routine of worry dolls and lullabies, Marcus asked Grace to join him in the living room because they needed to talk about something important. Grace must have sensed the change in his tone because her face went pale, and she sat across from him on the couch with her hands folded tightly in her lap, looking like someone preparing for execution. "I know about Michael and Elena," Marcus said quietly, and those words hit Grace like a physical blow, causing her to double over as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Tears immediately streaming down her face as 2 years of carefully hidden grief came pouring out all at once. Through her sobs, Grace told him everything, how she had taken the nanny job because being around children again was the only thing that made her feel alive, how Emma and Ethan's resemblance to her lost babies had both tortured and healed her in ways she couldn't explain, and how the lullaby she sang each night was one she had written for Michael and Elena during the long nights when they couldn't sleep as toddlers. She explained that the worry dolls had been her children's favorite bedtime ritual, something her own grandmother had taught her, and that every technique she used with the twins came from her desperate attempts to comfort her own babies during their short lives. "I never meant to lie to you," Grace whispered, her voice broken with anguish. "But I couldn't bear to tell you that I'm the kind of mother who wasn't there when her children needed her most. The kind of person who let her own babies die because work was more important than being home." Marcus felt his anger melting into something much more complicated as he listened to Grace's confession, realizing that her pain had been the very thing that made her so effective at healing his children. She understood their grief because she was living it every single day, and her love for Emma and Ethan was real, even though it was tangled up with her desperate need to honor her lost children's memory. But even as his heart ached for Grace's suffering, Marcus felt betrayed by the deception, wondering how many other important details she had hidden from him and whether he could trust someone who had built their entire relationship on such a significant lie about her identity and motivations. Grace seemed to read his thoughts because she stood up abruptly, wiping her tears with shaking hands, and announced that she would pack her things and leave immediately because she had no right to use his children as a way to heal her own broken heart. Emma and Ethan deserve someone who loves them for themselves, not as replacements for dead children, she said, her voice filled with self-hatred that made Marcus wince, and she turned toward the stairs before he could respond. But just as Grace reached the bottom step, both twins appeared at the top of the staircase in their pajamas, having been awakened by the sound of crying, and when they saw Grace's tears, they ran down to her with the fearless compassion that only children possess. "Why are you sad, Miss Grace?" Emma asked, throwing her small arms around Grace's legs, while Ethan reached up to pat her hand with his tiny fingers, both children instinctively offering the same comfort that Grace had given them during their darkest nights. "You can tell your scared feelings to the worry dolls too." Emma whispered seriously, pressing one of the small wooden figures into Grace's palm. "They help everyone feel better, even grown-ups." And as Marcus watched this innocent exchange, he realized that healing had been flowing in both directions. All along his children had been helping Grace recover from her trauma, just as much as she had been helping them process their grief. And maybe that mutual need was exactly what had made their bond so powerful and transformative for everyone involved. Grace left that very night while the twins slept peacefully, packing her few belongings in silence as Marcus watched from the hallway, his heart torn between protecting his children and understanding a woman whose pain ran deeper than any ocean. By the second day after Grace's departure, the familiar nightmare returned with a vengeance. Emma woke up screaming at 2 in the morning, calling for both her mama and Miss Grace, while Ethan threw such a violent tantrum that he made himself sick, refusing to eat or speak to Marcus no matter how desperately his father tried to comfort him. The house felt cold and empty again. All the warmth and laughter Grace had brought disappearing like smoke, and Marcus found himself walking the marble halls at all hours of the night with 2 inconsolable children, who kept asking when their beloved Nanny was coming back home. On the 3rd sleepless night, as Marcus sat exhausted in his office, trying to focus on work emails, while the twins finally dozed fitfully in his lap, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He climbed the stairs to the master bedroom and opened Sarah's closet for the first time since the accident, pulling out the wooden box where she had kept her most precious possessions. Inside, beneath old love letters and their wedding rings, he found Sarah's leather journal that she had written in every night before bed. And with trembling hands, Marcus began reading his late wife's private thoughts about their life together. Sarah's words filled page after page with hopes and dreams for their children. But it was one particular entry from just weeks before her death that made Marcus drop the journal as if it had burned his fingers. Because Sarah had written about her greatest fear that something might happen to her and leave the twins without a mother's love. "I pray that if I'm ever taken from this world too soon," Sarah had written in her careful handwriting, "Marcus will find someone who can love Emma and Ethan as fiercely as I do. Someone who understands that children need more than just care. They need someone who sees their souls and helps them grow into the beautiful people they're meant to become." Marcus read that passage 5 times, tears streaming down his face as he realized that Grace had been exactly what Sarah had prayed for. A woman who loved his children, not despite their brokenness, but because she understood how precious and fragile young hearts could be. The next morning, Marcus called the private investigator back and asked him to contact Grace's previous employers, expecting to discover more deception, but instead, he learned something that shocked him completely. Every single family Grace had worked for knew about Michael and Elena, knew about the fire, knew about her grief, because Grace had been completely honest with them from the very beginning about her tragic past. Mrs. Patterson from Bellevue explained how Grace had helped their autistic son learn to communicate after years of silence, while the Rodriguez family from Capitol Hill described how Grace had guided their daughter through the trauma of her parents' divorce with patience and wisdom that seemed to come from someone who truly understood loss. "Grace told us right away about her children," Mrs. Patterson said, "and that's exactly why we hired her, because we knew she would love our son with the intensity that only comes from understanding how precious every moment with a child really is." Marcus realized with growing shame that Grace's inability to tell him the truth hadn't been about deception at all, but about vulnerability. She had been afraid to open her heart to his family because the connection felt too powerful, too much like the second chance she didn't believe she deserved after failing to save her own babies. That afternoon, Marcus drove across Seattle to the small apartment where Grace was living, working night shifts at a different hospital because she couldn't bear to be around children during daylight hours anymore, her guilt having convinced her that she was dangerous to any child she might grow to love. When Grace answered her door and saw Marcus standing there with Emma and Ethan beside him, she fell to her knees as the twins ran into her arms, their joyful cries of Miss Grace echoing through the narrow hallway while neighbors peered out of their doors to witness the reunion. "I was wrong," Marcus said quietly, as Grace held his children like they were the most precious treasures in the world. "I was wrong to judge you for your pain, and I was wrong to think that loving my children because they remind you of yours makes that love any less real or important." Grace looked up at him with eyes full of hope and terror, afraid to believe that forgiveness was possible after the way she had hidden such a crucial part of herself. But Marcus knelt down beside her and explained that pain had never disqualified anyone from giving love, that the deepest love often came from the deepest understanding of loss. He told her about Sarah's journal entry, about her prayer for someone who would love their children fiercely, and he admitted that Grace's connection to Emma and Ethan through her own loss had made her love stronger, not weaker, because she knew exactly how fragile and precious childhood really was. "We need you," Marcus said, his voice breaking with emotion, "not as our employee, but as our family. Because Emma and Ethan need someone who understands their hearts, and I need someone who can teach me how to heal instead of just survive." Grace showed them the small photograph she had been carrying, a picture of Michael and Alina at a park, laughing on swings with their faces full of the same joy that Emma and Ethan had rediscovered under her care, and Marcus saw immediately why. His children had reminded her so powerfully of the babies she had lost. As they prepared to leave the tiny apartment together, Grace hesitated at the door, still afraid that her broken heart might somehow damage the children she loved so desperately. But Emma took her hand with the simple trust that only a child can offer and said, "Miss Grace, you don't have to be scared anymore, because we're all going to take care of each other now, just like a real family does." 6 months after Grace returned to their lives, the Chen penthouse had transformed into something that felt like home for the first time since Sarah's death, filled with the sounds of children's laughter mixing with Grace's gentle humming as she helped Emma and Ethan build elaborate castles from couch cushions, while Marcus worked from his home office, finally able to concentrate on his business because he knew his children were safe and happy. Grace was no longer just a nanny but had become Marcus's true partner in parenting, helping him make important decisions about schools and activities, staying up late to discuss Emma's shyness or Ethan's stubborn streaks, and gradually teaching Marcus how to navigate his own grief while still being the father his children needed. They had created new family traditions that honored everyone they had lost every Sunday. They visited Sarah's grave together, bringing fresh flowers and drawings the twins had made, while Grace would tell stories about Michael and Alina, helping Emma and Ethan understand that love doesn't end when someone dies, but finds new ways to grow and spread to other people who need it. The children had accepted Grace's story with the amazing resilience that only young hearts possess, immediately including Michael and Alina in heaven, in their nightly prayers, and sometimes leaving extra drawings on the kitchen counter for Grace's babies to see from up there. Their innocent acceptance helping both adults heal in ways that years of therapy had never accomplished. Marcus found himself falling in love with Grace slowly and carefully, their relationship growing from shared grief into something beautiful and strong, built on the foundation of understanding what it meant to lose everything and then choose to love again despite the risk. Grace helped him see that loving her didn't betray Sarah's memory, but honored it, because Sarah had always wanted him to find happiness, and their love was making him a better father to the children Sarah had treasured above everything else in the world. On quiet evenings after the twins were asleep, Marcus and Grace would sit together on the couch talking about their dreams for the future, and Marcus realized that he was planning again instead of just surviving, thinking about family vacations and birthday parties and all the beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life filled with love. The twins began sleeping through the night consistently, but more importantly, they were thriving in ways that amazed everyone who knew them. Emma had started kindergarten with confidence, making friends and participating in school plays, while Ethan had channeled his strong will into learning to read and helping Grace in the kitchen. Both children showing the world that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. Grace officially became their legal guardian through adoption papers that made Emma and Ethan as much hers-in-law as they already were in their hearts. And the children proudly told everyone at school that they had the best daddy and the best mommy Grace in the whole world, their simple joy proving that families can be created through love rather than just blood. But it was on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Grace had first sung her lullaby in their home, that Marcus knew their healing was complete and their new beginning was truly real. The house sparkled with lights and decorations that Grace and the twins had chosen together, the Christmas tree standing tall beside the fireplace, where 4 stockings hung in a perfect row, Emma's red one covered in glitter, Ethan's green one with his name in bold letters, Marcus's navy blue one that Grace had embroidered with small stars, and Grace's white stocking that the children had decorated with hearts and flowers. But what made Marcus's breath catch in his throat was the sight of 2 small angel ornaments hanging from the highest branches of the tree, one labeled Mama Sarah in Emma's careful printing, and the other reading Michael and Alina in Grace's elegant script, representing all the angels who had brought their family together through love that transcended death itself. That night, as Grace tucked Emma and Ethan into their beds for what had become their favorite part of every day, Marcus joined her for the bedtime routine that had saved them all, and together they sang the lullaby that had first brought peace to their broken home, their voices blending in harmony as they watched their children drift off to sleep